Hi, everybody. Welcome to our channel. On here, we're going to be discussing some of the misrepresentations of parts of history and kind of like the way that it's shown in pop culture in media today, which is not always accurate. This is not what you were taught in history class. And we're going to try and set the record straight so that there's no like misconceptions out there of events that really happened that are in fact more interesting to know the truth than whatever this fabricated myth is. So today, Titania is going to take a dive and tell us about, what are you telling us about today?
So I know we wanted to discuss misrepresentations, but for our first video, I totally went off topic. And
leave it to you.
I chose something that I think is just not super well known, but I find it super fascinating. So to kick off our brand new series, we're going to discuss self-made mummies. Or, yeah, or Sokushinbutsu, as it's known in Japanese. I'm going to do my best with these words.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I guess there is kind of this belief that mummies only exist in Egypt.
That is true. A lot of people forget that mummification was very popular across the world. You can find mummies on every continent. So it does fit into the topic then.
So the topic is breaking the mold on mummies.
Sure. I call them yes, as well as, yeah, no, that works. Because I was gonna say the process in this specific type of mummy is very different than what you think about when you learn about mummies. So, like, contrary to Egyptian mummies, which happened after a person died, and obviously there's no involvement from the dead person other than just being there, self-mummification is a process that you do to yourself while alive until you aren't alive anymore.
Until you have reached pure mummification.
Yeah, kind of, we'll say that.
I'm actually really excited about this because I don't know anything about this. I just know about like mummies, traditional.
Right. So breaking the mold on mummies works really well because not only are they outside of Egypt, but it's also a whole other process of mummification than what we think about.
I'm excited. Let's do this.
So self-mummification is a practice housed in the Shugendo religion, which is a mountain worship religion that combines Buddhism and Shinto. It was founded in Japan during the Heian period, which is 794 to 1185 AD or CE, depending on how you...
What does CE stand for? Do you know?
I Googled today.
I've always wondered.
Already forgotten.
I know what AD is because it's Anno Domini. I never knew what CE.
Oh, AD is after death. So
yeah, Anno Domini.
Is that the Latin for it?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. No, I've always been told after death and like before Christ. And then the CE and BCE are the non-Christian ways of saying it. What does CE mean? Which is why I put it in there, because I didn't want to just be like AD when not everyone. What? Oh, nope. What does CE in dates mean? Common era. And BC is before
Common era. Okay.
The time, they say the time period's the same as AD and BC, but there you go. Super. Actually, it's not that long ago when you think about it.
It's only 2021 years ago.
But this was founded in Japan, but it's actually seen in several other Asian countries. These particular mummies are very special and very rare, as mummifying yourself is a very difficult process.
Sounds real intense.
Yes, it is. And according to Wikipedia, only 24 of these mummies have been discovered, but it's believed that hundreds have tried the process.
Were they all found in Japan?
So of the 8 that... So I know of 8 that are specifically in Japan.
Oh, okay.
So of the 24, only 16 are considered to have been successful. And I believe the 24 are from Japan. But 8 of them are from the same region.
How do you unsuccessfully do you just not become a mummy?
I will get there. We will get there.
Okay.
So that's a really good question. And that's actually a question I didn't even think of. I do believe they're from Japan.
Okay.
The successful ones, but I could be wrong on that one.
You just said they were from all over, so I thought
the religion was from across Asia.
Oh, so it's not, okay.
Yeah, so the religion was founded in Japan, but it spread across Asia. So there could be these mummies, but out of the time period, there weren't a whole lot of people. Like hundreds of people out of that range of time isn't a lot. You know,
out of any time, it's not a lot.
Right. So, and I mean, they're rare. So when you think about Egyptian mummies used to be super common. Like they're everywhere. The only reason they're rare now is because people ate them. So
looking at you, Victorian England.
Yeah. So these mummies, though, like I said, there's only been 24 discovered. There's the thought that there's more out there, but they haven't been discovered. And only 16 are considered successful. And there are two of, like in Japan, there are two shrines where these mummifications are known to have taken place. In the Dewa Sanzan in Yamagata Prefecture, the shrines Dainichibo and the shrine Churenji are where you can actually go today to see some of these mummies on display. And that's where 8 of the 16 successful mummies reside. And they are considered to be still living and are worshipped as holy men. So the belief is that there would be a second coming of Buddha, and that Buddha would reanimate those who had achieved spiritual purity to help him bring enlightenment to the world. So the self-mummification process was thought to ensure that the monk was preserved in a state of spiritual purity and would be one of the chosen few who would aid Buddha in this new world enlightenment. The Holy Afterlife was the end goal of self-mummification. The monk would dedicate the last years of his life to this process, enduring trials and sacrifices, all in the hopes of becoming a living Buddha. The downside is that you can go through this entire process and still not achieve this end goal. After death, if the corpse appeared to be well preserved, then the mummification would be considered successful and they would be treated as a living Buddha. If the monk was discovered decomposed, then it is considered a failure and he was laid to rest with honor for the attempt. That is how it's considered successful or failed.
Okay, so I have to think about my mummy history here. So what is considered, because typically when you're mummified, you're embalmed, so you don't rot away. So are they talking about like in that aspect, like your skin is not rotting, or like your organs as well?
Nothing is removed in this process, so you should look as you did in life. So, and
this is some freaky shit.
Yeah, and when you look at the mummies, they don't, like, they look like mummies when you look at the actual ones. But
right,
according to legends surrounding them, when they were first discovered, like, and I'll go into the process, but at the end of the process, when they were looked at, they looked as they did in life, so that obviously the death didn't touch their bodies. They were chosen by Buddha, so then they were put on display. And there's actually some controversy around it because over time, they started, like, the organ area started decomposed because they would change their clothes and clean the body. And over time, they noticed that the organ area started to decompose. So somewhere around the late 1800s, they actually lacquered some of these bodies to protect them, to keep them from decomposing. But that is sort of like an afternote and not part of the process, because those mummies were already considered successful because when they were removed, they weren't decomposing. There's the chance that when they opened the tomb to look and see if the mummy was successful, that you were already decomposing, like you were looking like a rotten corpse. And if you were, it didn't work, you weren't chosen. Good try. That's some very basic info about these unusual mummies. And I'm sorry I didn't answer all of your religious questions. But
how dare you?
I know. But how does one actually self-mummify? And this is what I decided to focus on. I find this fascinating. So first of all, I just have to say, don't try this at home. Just in case. Don't try this at home.
So I don't want to self-mummify. Okay, question before we get into the self-mummification process. Is it better for me to self-mummify or go join the host?
The host sounds less painful.
That's saying a lot.
Yeah.
All
for
right.
questions about the host, check out our other podcast. I will link it up here and you'll know what she's talking about. It will be a running theme, I'm sure.
I'm forever a member of the host. It's okay.
I just wanted to point out, informational purposes only. And I wanted to throw in a trigger warning. This is technically a form of suicide. And we'll also be discussing death, decomposition, corpses. And so if you're uncomfortable with any of that, please tune out and we will see you next week. Okay. Self-made mummies. So the process.
Let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Yes. So the process to self-mummify while still alive is a very long and very painful, in my opinion, process. Once a monk has decided that this is what he's been called to do, he would move to the first 1,000-day phase, where he would commit to 2 lifestyle changes. First is a change in diet called Moku Jiku Gyo, and the second is to isolate themselves in the mountains called Sanro. This strict diet consists of only nuts, roots, and pine bark. The sacrifice of all other food is made as a point of committing yourself to the spiritual path, such as ignoring the pleasures of the world. However, scientifically speaking, this diet is actually used to rid the body of as much fat as possible. As we know, the juicier... Yeah. So as we know, the juicier...
Because nuts are just straight protein. Sorry. We're having a delay again. Nuts are straight protein is what I was trying to say. They don't really do much. I mean, I'm sure they have some vitamins and antioxidants, whatever, but it's mostly just like a source of protein. So
right, and actually,
I don't know what benefit there is to eating fucking pine bark. But
there is, and I will get into that later.
Okay.
Yeah, and you know, there's something called the 5 grains or the 10 cereals or something in Japan that's like a staple of diet. And so you're forsaking everything about your culture, everything about the world to commit to these very few things that you can eat. But as we know, the juicier a body is, the quicker it will decompose. The success of the most popular mummies from Egypt can be attributed also to the dry deserts of the land. The climate would help to dry out the corpses, which destroyed the habitat within the body that would normally allow bacteria specific to decomposition to thrive. So as we know, they would remove the organs and they would wrap them up and they would get them in these sealed areas. And the dry air is something that is considered to why we have so many successful Egyptian mummies. So without the moisture, the bacteria will die, which allows the flesh to remain intact in that sort of desert environment, and allows the flesh to be dried out and preserved. And I put a note here, like human jerky.
It kind of is. That's why the Victorians went and, I mean, they weren't selling human jerky. They were just like smashing them up into drinks and shit because they're fucking weirdos.
It was a cure-all. Or there's a paint pigment called mummy brown that literally had mummy in it. Yeah, so when you compare Egypt to Japan, in contrast, Japan is practically the exact opposite. It has a very moist and humid climate. So they needed a different method of preservation so that they because they couldn't rely on the land to assist in this mummification. So the fluids of the body needed to be removed in a different way. In the case of Sokushinbutsu, it's removed through starvation. Since the body will eat through its fat stores while starving, this allows the very juicy fat tissue to be removed while the monk is still alive. So that's one step in the mummification process, is to remove as much fluid from the body as possible. Juicy tissue, as I call it.
I would just like to point out that, so like you said, it's step one of like 1,000 days to mummification, which is over 3 years.
No,
about 3 years.
Phase 1 is 1,000 days.
Oh, so
just under
so that's like
years.
almost 3 years. Okay, So, side note, because I have to, every one of your stories always reminds me of a serial killer. I don't know why. But there was a serial killer. She was a doctor, and she had people, she starved them. Like, they starved, and they literally starved to death. Like, they were allowed like a half a cup of broth and like a sip of water or something.
She ran like a
day. That was it.
To care for people.
Yeah, she killed like tons of people, but she kind of got away with it because they willingly did it. Like, she did it, like, she told them this is what you need to do, and they willingly went with bad advice. Like, but that's all I can think of when talking about them, like, literally just starving themselves. I'm like, it doesn't take much to starve yourself, and it can take a while to fully get there. Like, some of those people went like 60, 90 days of nothing, and we're still alive.
Yeah. It all depends on how much fat tissue
So,
that you have in your body.
Yeah. And this is just food that they're eating. This isn't like what they consume for. I'm assuming they're drinking water, at least to some degree. You have to have some sort of.
Yeah, I believe they're drinking water, but they're drinking and eating very small amounts. Like, think of it as eating just enough to hold off the severe, deep, crippling hunger.
Right, because they want to rid themselves of the liquid, so you don't want to put more liquid in you. But I would assume that they would have some sort of.
It's debatable if they knew whether or not that removing the liquids from their body was part of what they actually wanted. You know, it was when we look back on it in that documentary that was made in 2018, and they look back on the process scientifically, and they were trying to figure out how do these mummies work? How does it work? Right? They, this is sort of a scientific explanation of, well, when they're on this diet, you're ridding the body of water and fatty tissue.
Everything.
Yeah, but whether or not they knew that that's what was happening, we don't know. We just know this was like a religious diet for this exercise.
Kind of like a very extreme fast.
Correct. So while they're doing that, the second part of this first phase, called Sanro, or translated isolation within the mountains, the monk would seclude themselves up, typically in the mountain, near these two shrines. There's a really famous one, which I don't remember the name, but they had housing built specifically for this purpose. So that's where they would stay. And during this time, the monk would wash themselves 3 times a day with frigid water before heading up to a nearby shrine while reciting some religious text along the way. So they had to do this ritual every single day with 0 breaks and an absolute isolation. No one was allowed to visit. So this was actually the most difficult part to survive, and you needed to survive this 1,000 days. It's part of the ritual. But it's so difficult. What?
I said, like, even just dieting aside, just doing the religious stuff, I know it's hard for people who like convert to Buddhism to do, because they spend a lot of time in just like straight meditation for hours and hours. It's very taxing on the body. It is very, very taxing.
Right. And you've got that. And then in addition, the winters in these areas are particularly harsh. And if a monk got
brutal.
Yeah, and you're losing all your body fat, right? So you can't keep warm. And then if the monk got sick, they were not allowed medical attention. So essentially, if you died during this process, it wasn't in your cards to be selected as a living Buddha, but you would still be honored for the attempt.
That's actually really cool that they do that. That you've started on the journey, and even just starting it is enough for them to say, if you die 2 weeks in, you've still got this honorary status. It's actually really nice. Not many religions do that.
Yeah, that's very true. It's either pass or fail, right?
Yeah. That's actually really cool. I like that aspect of it.
So this 1,000-day process can be repeated as many times as a monk feels necessary. So this is a spiritual journey, and if they felt it was not yet time to move on to the next phase, then they would redo the process. However, they have to continue to follow the diet during any time taken in between the 1,000-day sprint. There's been records of people doing this 3 to 4 times before moving to the next step.
So I know we're talking about a religion, and I'm not saying that all religions are this way, but this sounds very much like a cult. I'm also not saying that all cults are religious based. I'm just saying it sounds kind of like a cult.
Well, kind of, but the difference between this and a cult is this is a person's own motivation and self-will driving them to do this rather than someone telling them that they had to. Because within this religion, you're never told that this is your path. You have to be called to it spiritually.
Yeah, they do seem very open to, you know, if you fall off or something bad happens, like they're very much like, it's okay. It's not an easy thing, which is why, you know, not just anyone can do it. So that
I don't know for certain, but I think it's more honorable to have died in the attempt than to give up.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So when the monk is ready to move to the next step, he will finish out his however many thousand days and then move to the next 1,000 day phase.
I do actually have another question that you may or may not get to or know the answer. Is there an age at which you are, so you could start at any age?
You could, but it is highly recommended that you have to be in this sort of spiritual place. Like you can't just rush into it at the age of 20. I mean, you could, but your elders around you will try to talk to you and be like, you know, you have to be in a very specifically centered place to be called to do this. Otherwise, they think you're going to fail. Like you're not ready.
So there's kind of like a support group at the start of you making that decision.
Right.
So
there's these two temples.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's these two temples, and there are monks at these temples. So you would essentially be a monk at this temple. And you have...
Right, I figured during the process there were more people. I didn't realize, like, leading up to actually starting it, that there was, like, sort of a group of people involved to help you, like, make the choice on, am I in the right spot to begin this journey, or do I still need, like, time or whatever, you know?
I have to preface that with theoretically, because we haven't had a self-made mummy in over 100 years. The thought is that there, you know, like people would help them reach a level of spiritual enlightenment before they felt called, you know.
Which makes sense.
We don't actually know.
I don't know many. Right, and I'm like, I don't also know like many religions in which you just kind of get there on your own and are completely on your own. Like it's always some sort of group that is involved with it.
Right. And so, we don't, yeah, we just don't know all the details around everything that leads up to this moment, other than it is supposed to be something that calls to you. And then you work your way.
Assuming that this is all legit and really happened, there would have been a group that would have been there to, I assume, assist with the monks and whatnot and help people on their journey. Whatever, like that was their job. No.
The monk has to do this by themselves. Once they start the 1,000-day process, it's in total isolation.
No. I know that, but like you're talking about these two shrines or temples or whatever. So there's like a group of people to help them start their journey, if you will. Once you start your journey, because you talk about going into the woods and shit. Like you went crazy after that. There was like a group.
Yeah, so you have the monks, and then you have people who aren't quite. I think there's different levels within there, and you have like the assistants that help you do things. So there's the story of the first guy to do this. He reached a certain point where he couldn't bathe himself, and he had assistants helping him to bathe. So, but
well, I mean, like in all religions, some people don't like. Not everyone aspires to be the Pope. You know, they're gonna like they want to be either the bishop or whatever, but they never. So like, there's always people in those lower positions that like they're like, this is my calling. I'm not called on to do this self-mummification, but I am here to help the people who do that sort of vibe.
But you did make the comment of like, if this actually happened, we actually do know this happened. like this is documented.
I mean, what I meant by if this actually happened was if the way that we believe all of this went down.
Got it. Okay. Correct. Okay.
Obviously, we have mummies. That's not questioned here. It's just the process, assuming that the process went, because I'm going to assume that they didn't write down every single day of their life leading up to this, and at some point they may not have been able to.
But the process itself is actually like, so when the first guy did it, no, obviously it wasn't written down, but the process itself is like written down as, so if you're called to do this, this is what you have to do. And you have to follow these steps to do it. So like we do have that. But I can't say that, yeah, in the beginning, this is what the first guy to do this did. Yeah, I'm going to do it.
Right. It was probably a lot of people who went through this, and just over time, they kind of realized we need to put this down so that people can get to this point, whatever. Anyway,
right.
Continue phase 2. What is this
All
phase
right.
2?
So when the monk is ready, he will move on to the next 1,000-day phase. So that's another just under 3 years. In this, the monk would switch his diet to consist of only bark and roots of a pine tree. So he essentially eliminated nuts and added the...
So what is the benefit of eating a pine tree?
So the benefit of eating a pine tree is that there is resin within the pine, which is known as a preservative. It's also highly toxic. But the theory in the studies they've done is that perhaps this resin helped in the preservation of the flesh. But they would also consume a tea made with the sap from the urushi tree. This sap is traditionally used in the production of lacquer, which is a type of sealant used across Japan for centuries on furniture. So this tea is actually thought to be more beneficial than the pine, because this tea...
So they're literally sealing themselves from the inside out? Okay.
Yes-ish. So this tea...
In a way, that's my mind.
So...
Why else would we eat pine?
Getting there. So as it turns out, this tea might be the magic ingredient for self-mummification. It is so toxic that it causes extreme vomiting, which helps rid the body of all the extra fluids it may have after the starvation diet. And then in addition, the chemicals in the tea store themselves in the body, which creates an environment too toxic for bacteria to grow. So it will ward off maggots and other creepy crawlies, which are the key to the decomposition process. That's what I'm saying, it'll get there. Yeah, so you're just creating an environment where things that normally decompose your body cannot live.
You know when you see something or read something and you just have to like get up and walk around? That's where I'm at. Like, what?
Yeah, and what's quite interesting is it wasn't until recently that we understood what this chemical, this tea, does to the body. These mummies were a mystery until recently, when they're like, actually, this is what scientifically is happening to the body that may be aiding in the mummification process. Yeah, so you go from...
We're already at like 6 years. Oh, Jesus, how many phases are there?
You starve yourself and then you drink poison. So, but you're not dead yet. Hopefully.
How many phases are there?
3.
No wonder they honored people who died, because people probably died all the freaking time.
Yeah. Think of the guy that decided to do the first phase 4 times and then did this. That's a significant chunk of your life.
Now, I know we discussed that the first phase you could do until you felt that you were spiritually ready.
Correct.
So does the same apply to the second phase, or is the second phase like you do it once and then you move on?
If you're doing the second phase, you won't survive, because you're actively drinking poison and eating poison. Like, you won't come back from phase 2.
Okay. So the second phase just immediately goes into the third phase. Got it. Okay.
But it doesn't immediately go into third phase. It still takes time. But like, once you're in
takes
phase
1,000 days.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, there is no doing it 4 times. It's you go phase 2, then phase 3.
You do phase 2 once.
Okay.
In addition to this poison that they're drinking from the tree, there's also the thought that during this time, monks drank from a sacred stream called Yudono, and or ate the mineral deposits from the water. And actually, when you go to the temples today, you can purchase little bottles of this water if you want to drink it yourself. I highly, highly recommend not doing that. But it turns out that the spring contains lethal levels of arsenic, which is a known preservative. Yeah.
Holy shit.
So the thought is they're drinking from this well. They're building up the arsenic in their bodies, which is going to ensure death. That's one of the reasons why they drink from the well. It would ensure death would happen. But also arsenic is a wonderful preservative. And actually a fun fact, Emperor Napoleon, his body is thought to have been so well preserved because of the copious amounts of arsenic that was used to kill him. So
I love how you say that it's a wonderful preservative, because there's nothing wonderful about arsenic.
It has one use outside of killing people. So
that's the only use, killing people
and preserving people. So it's thought that
I think it's just an unintended side effect.
Right. So it's a thought that this arsenic also aids in the preservation of the mummies after death. Finally, once this stage has hit its 1,000 day mark, you move to phase 3, which is the final phase. So the monk would be buried alive in an underground pit. This tomb would be only large enough so that the monk could sit in the lotus position, which is cross-legged, and it would be completely sealed with only a bamboo pipe inserted in to allow air, so the monk can keep breathing, because we don't want him to suffocate. That's not what this is about. The monk would be given a bell to ring once a day to let observers know that he is alive. There would often be someone stationed outside of the tomb. And there he would spend his days meditating and just waiting to die.
So is it like a sort of like a cage or a box in the ground?
Yeah, it's kind of like it's kind of like they dig a pit and then they line it with bricks typically, and then they cover that all with dirt.
When you said that they buried him alive, and they're like, they're not trying to suffocate him, I'm like, no, he's just gonna die from the pressure. No. But if he's in a box, that makes sense.
I don't know what killed him first, the poison or the starvation, honestly. But the first guy to document doing this took 13 days to die.
How?
Yeah, I know, right? 13 days. He had no water, no food, and he's been drinking this poison, but it took 13 days.
And he starved to...
For years before. Don't know. But that's why this is like if you take the science away from it, that this is why it's seen as such a spiritual, miraculous thing. If you made it to this point, you've gone through all of that, you're still fine.
I need to walk around, man.
There's more. There's more. There's more. All right.
There's more.
Technically, there's a fourth phase, but I don't call it phase 4 because you're dead at this point, right? So once the bell was no longer heard, the bamboo pipe would be removed and the final little hole would be sealed. There, the monk would be left undisturbed for another 1,000 days. After this time had passed, the tomb would be opened to see if the monk achieved a successful mummification. And this was determined by the quality of the corpse. If well preserved, then success. If it was decomposing, then failure. So I hope that explains a little bit more of the success and failure, because after you see the process and it's been 3 more years, dead, it kind of makes a little bit more sense. Now,
but it's also maybe not necessarily the monk's fault, because if they don't plug up that tomb right,
perhaps, but then it's just not it's not seen as you weren't meant to be a living Buddha. But even if it's somebody else's mistake, and that's why what makes it kind of crappy, I guess, because you can go through years of this, do everything right, and it still fails. They could seal the hole properly, but the bacteria in your body say that you had more body fat on you than somebody else, or the ratio of tea that you were drinking. Something go wrong where the bacteria can still grow and decompose the body. Yeah, that's why they're so rare, because it's such a difficult process to get right. And just because you do it right doesn't mean it will be successful.
If I ever go this route, and I don't become a living Buddha because somebody fucked up my last phase 3, whatever, phase 4, I am coming back and haunting some motherfuckers.
Pretty sure that's the anti-Buddhist way, but okay.
I don't care.
Oh, if the mummy was successful,
I will come back from Nirvana and haunt you the fuck out.
Yeah.
Shangri-La, whatever the fuck they call it. Fuck you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I totally get it. So, if the mummy was successful, the monk would be removed and placed on display as a living Buddha. There he will be given all honors and due process. And the mummy will wait on display until the second coming of Buddha revives them.
It's actually really cool. And they're just on display at those temples?
Yeah, you can go and visit them. There? Yeah, Japan, Japan.jp or Travel Japan. It's Japan official tourist website actually gives you directions on how to get there if you want to see them. Like they're part of the tourist attraction. Don't drink the water.
So yeah, no, I'm not gonna drink the water. I'd be terrified it's like mummy water or some shit.
No, it's
like,
just arsenic.
Victorian, but
it's so every natural spring.
Really cool.
They say every natural spring has a bit of arsenic in it, but this is the only one tested in the world, if I remember correctly, that has lethal amounts of arsenic in it. So those are self-made mummies. If you're interested in learning more, I've put my sources in the description. I also highly recommend watching the documentary that I linked. It details the story of one of the first cases of self-mummification and goes a bit deeper into the past and current religious beliefs of the mummies, of the monks, of the mummies. I'm not exactly sure how to say that. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. Have any topics you would like us to discuss, please leave them in the comment section. And think about hitting the subscribe button and turning on the bell so that you can be notified when we post our next video. So until next time.